Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. And it's been just a touch over a week since our last episode. I hope everyone enjoyed that last one. We went over quite a bit of news. Tonight, or I suppose today, for those of you listening to the live premiere tonight for us recording over here, we have a slightly lighter news load, so might be a shorter episode, but we'll see where the conversation really takes us. Because in just a moment here, we're going to start our coverage on Ukraine, shift over to the Middle East, read this Robert Kagan article I've been chomping at the bit to get to. And of course, there's quite a bit of news out of East Asia, particularly with Trump's visit. There's a lot to pick apart there. And without further ado, we'll get right into it.
Okay. Let me get I have to get to the maps. Okay. An interesting amount of changes have taken place. Now, I paradoxically I don't have that many maps. So I want people to study the first map before we get into the details. So the first map is the Zaporozhye Southern Front. And notice that in the bottom left-hand corner, the Ukrainians have made several gains in this area over those that we mentioned during the last show. I think this is in the Stepanove area. They're inching almost to the outskirts of Plavy. You can see now that the first line of defense that the Russians had captured is disintegrating. However, the Russians on the eastern side of the Zaporozhye front are advancing. Notice the black outlines; those are the gains that the Russians have made after the ceasefire. I'll get into what was not recorded during the ceasefire. There were some gains, right? For the Russian side, around Konstantinovka. But it's been a very busy week for me and a very busy weekend, so I haven't had time to, uh, y- you know, uh, to post as many screen caps for the show. Anyways, so you can see that the Russians are making their own advances, about equal in size to the Ukrainians in the west, outside of the Gulyapolye area and the area north of it. If we go to the first slide, after this bird's eye view of the Zaporozhye front, um, you can see that the Russians are expanding in an area basically west of Gulyapolye, but west of a town that they captured a little while ago called Mirne, which paradoxically means peaceful. Now they've the Ukrainians started abandoning some of the positions in Gulyapolskie, which is different from Gulyapolye. It's a diminutive of Gulyapolye. That's why it ends with ske. And then Novoselovka, yet another village named Novoselovka. Now they have managed to entrench themselves there. How well they can hold on, I don't know. Um, this is a notoriously difficult area for both sides because, as you can see, there are not many major roads here for resupplying. And to Ukraine's credit, in the south, around Blogira or Blohira, uh, they've managed to take away some territory of that town, or the town rather adjacent to it. Um, Now the Russians, despite everything, despite their setbacks, and a lot of people have said, the Russian this Russian spring so far has been slow. But if you look at 2025, 2024, 2023, 2023 January had zero or like 10 kilometers. So uh, and neither side has ever performed as badly as that. So the numbers are better than the spring of 2023. at least the early part of the spring, late winter. So, I mean, it's kind of a cope, right? It's, for instance, like when they talk about, let's say, the refineries that the Ukrainians are hitting. Well, I mean, this week Russia hit two Ukrainian refineries. But of course, the Ukrainians also hit a refinery in Ryazan, I think, uh, which, if I'm not mistaken, is in the south of Russia, next to Ukraine. Um, so let's go to the next slide. The next slide, again, is sort of like a bird's eye view, but this area is immediately adjacent to the north of the area that we looked at. This is still part of the eastern Zaporozhye front. Um, the Russians are taking over. Well, they already took this town. I believe it starts with the V. Vozvi- Vozvizhovka. So they're clearing out basically the western end of it. Now, what you'll notice about this overview is there's still a strong salient. Now, the black outlines are the territories that the Russians captured from Tuesday onwards. So they're making decent progress here, and you'll notice that um, that they managed to secure that second line of defense. You can see the black outline to the right of the red outline that you see with all the little pistol icons. Now, it's important because there is a railroad that goes through here, and part of the attack vector of the Russians has been successful due to the usage um, of this railroad. Now, what the Russians are going to want is a town southwest of it, Rivne, and a town north of it, Rizvyanka. They need these to secure if they were going to push any further west. They will also have to get, I believe it's Bolkove. Um, that might have been a town that they actually controlled at one point, but the Ukrainians pushed them out. Anyways, so this is the Zaporozhye front. You can go to the blow up of the town of Vozvizh Vozvizh. Oh my God, Vozvizhdovka. Dvizhi is to like hang around, like to if someone is to loiter around an area. It's the same in Southern Slavic languages as it is in Russian and Ukrainian. Anyways, so here's the blow up of it. You can see that again, because this area is not always easily supplied, you can see why the Russians had to take control of the fortifications. But that hump that you see near the fortifications north east of the area that the Russians have taken, this is actually not a bad. It looks bad for the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians have been able to stay in this area for quite a while, which to me means that they are being supplied again by drones, and it has been a thorn in the Russian side, and this is why they back and forth very much like Rodinske and the Pokrovsk area. Why they it goes back and forth is because not being able to solidify the gains around these trench networks. Anyways, let's move on to the Kupiansk and northern front. And there have been several changes here. The Russians have basically finally secured the road that goes from Kupiansk to Svatove. Svatove is an area like in the bottom right hand corner. I circled it. That's roughly where the town is. And you can see where Kupiansk is now. Going back to late 2022, early 2023, the Ukrainians were just a few kilometers outside of Svatove, and like almost the pale peach color orange area, most of it like was never under Russian. I mean, was not under Russian control after September 2022. So let's dive in a little bit more deeply as to what is going on here. So this slide shows you the red and the black outlines. The black outlines are anywhere from 2 to 4 days old, and the red outline is literally today, the May 16th. And you can see, except for one tiny little blue speck, the Russians have mostly cleared the road that goes from Svatove into Kupiansk, and they've really secured their area around Petropavlovka. That's definitely under their control now, but they're also moving towards central Kupiansk, Veslovy. So this is I mean, I guess it's a little town named after Kupiansk, but you could look at it as a suburb. But you know, it's further out than Kupiansk proper for it to be a suburb. In any case, it's well within Kupiansk orbit. Um, so, as you know, this is one of the most porous areas of fighting, but the Russians have been able to be slowly to turn the tide in this area. And again, they used to control all of, or virtually all of, Kupiansk, but any of these territories south and southeast of Kupiansk, the Russians didn't control. And so the only way to support the troops was from road networks from the north. Now, you'll see why, because there are Ukrainian gains, why the road networks from Russia going into the Kharkov area of Kupiansk and Kharkov proper, there are no major roads, and for this reason, it it will be hard for the Russians to get resupplied properly here. In any case, with a lot of effort, they have managed to uh, gain new territory and are working on regaining Kupiansk. The next slide will show you the road that I'm talking about. I've outlined it in red. It's like this big crescent that to secure this whole area. All these areas that are in the gray zone, the two pockets that are in the blue zone, where there are confirmed Ukrainians. I think before the Piansk, they will want to control this territory. So that means expanding past Petropavlovka, getting into Podoli, securing all of Kupiansk, Vislovy, Novosinove, all of this area must be secured first. And maybe even go all the way to the Oskal River, which they are close in some areas. Anyways, let's go to the next slide, because I'll tell you why, even if north of here, where the roads are even smaller, why the Oskal River might be difficult for the Russians. So this is the Kharkov area, and the blue outlines are Ukrainian gains from today. The black outlines are from Friday by the Russians. And you can see that the towns that a town that the Russians captured here a week ago or so, and the area around it has been lost. So this is the area. It's just north of Kupiansk. Again, no major roads. However, for the Ukrainians, they have a much better road system here. And as you can see, they've already began working on trench networks to the west of it. Now, you can't see it on the map, but Kharkov is to the left of the left side of this screen cap. And then if you go south from there is Poltava. So so they have major cities close by, but with better roads, larger roads. Because traditionally there's been more Ukrainians living in this area than the adjacent area where the Russians live. Both areas are farming areas, but the Ukrainian area is more dense, partly because Kharkov is the second biggest city in Ukraine. It was 1.1 million people before the war, and even after the first few months of the war. In any case, let's go to the next slide, which is a blow up. We'll see the name. Odradne. Odradne is the name of the town. So this is a bit of a pushback. I have argued for months that the Russians have wanted the Ukrainians to come into this area. Of course, the Russians don't want to lose this territory, so it's I'm not coping, but it is something that they need Ukrainian forces to come up to this area to alleviate pressure
Yes,
that they're facing in Pokrovsk and Zaporozhye.
in a grand strategy, if you will, diverting Ukrainian forces north, even at the cost of setbacks there, is a trade worth making as far as the Russians are concerned.
Yes, yes. Because the Russians don't technically make a claim on the Kharkov region, but they do in Zaporozhye and Donetsk. So, I mean, they're legally bound to it, as it were.
Yes, there's no.
Not as it were, they literally are. But the next slide will put things into context. So we're pulling back a bit, and you can see the context in which this is happening. Now, I want you to notice that if you look at where the Ukrainians have made the gain, there's a bright orange line over the orange area. Okay, that's I guess that's the jurisdiction of one area of Kharkov as opposed to another. All right. But immediately to the right of that, you'll see like a forested area on an arc going south. That's the Oskol River. And if you're supplying Russian forces from the southeast, you having to cross the Oskol River makes it difficult. So in other words, what I'm saying is if you're supplying this area for the Russians from the north, and we've already discussed that the roads aren't that great, and you decide to use the area on the east side of the Oskol River, that's also difficult. So anyways, that's something to keep in mind. Now you'll notice in the upper left corner, the Ukrainians have made some gains there as well. And this is also in the Kharkov area and Volchansk, or the Volchansk area, but not Volchansk. The Russians have definitely secured Volchansk and some of the villages around it. However, the Ukrainians are now pushing back in an area outside of Vilcha. Another area is Kravske. And the other areas, it's too obscured for me. Staritsa. So it took the Ukrainians a long time to I mean, the Russians have been whittling away at this area for months. According to Weeb Union, this is the Ukrainians have been counterattacking in this area for 5 weeks. So that's going back to March. But this is the fruit of their labor so far.
I know it's
And
extremely dubious to ask, but is there any even estimate at what casualties look like out of that particular sector?
I don't know about that sector. Now there was
Because
another exchange of dead,
yes, please go on.
right? So the exchange of dead since January has been 1,000 Ukrainians for 33 Russians. Then it went to 31 to 35. I had it. Let me see if I can find it in my screen caps. Pardon me. I don't have it, but basically, April was 1,000 dead Ukrainians for 41 Russians. All the previous months were in the 30s or the high 20s. To for the Russians and 1,000 for the Ukrainians. This is the first month where the Ukrainians have greatly reduced the number of dead, 41 Russians to 569 Ukrainians. So it's still terrible, but it's like, I don't know if people realize, but these exchange numbers, it's been like this for 14 months, 13 months, where, I mean, we had 3 months last year where it was 1,000 to 0,
Yes, and
right?
I
Now,
was it last year or 2024 where they had the incident where the Ukrainians were refusing the bodies that the Russians had in these mobile coolers.
yeah, because they then, but somehow they were convinced to put aside their pride and, because Ukraine, for instance, if you look at support for the war in Ukraine in December and January was extremely low, the lowest that it had ever been. But in March and April, it shot up. As soon as the Ukrainians start doing well, the public like immediately starts to back them. So it's I mean, I'm not saying it was like a 70% jump or something, right? Like, don't get me wrong. However, um, 10, 15% change, it's still significant.
Yes, and these numbers do fluctuate, as you were saying, the more ostensible success Ukraine does have. But another thing on the casualty numbers, just overall, it's not a concrete argument, but I invite anyone with the stomach for it to just look at all of the compiled footage of Ukrainian military cemeteries across the country. These places are unbelievable. Like, if you were to take the Ukrainians at their word, take Marco Rubio at his word about Russian casualties versus the Ukrainian casualties, that should simply not be the
It-
case.
yeah, it's insane. The most generous thing I could say is they're the same.
Oh yeah,
That's the most generous thing to say. I think realistically, the Ukrainians are suffering greater casualties than the Russians are. But what margin, I don't know. If the Ukrainians simply don't want to retrieve Russian bodies, I don't know the logic behind that. I don't know why they would do that, but because it would be in their prop for a country that depends on propaganda so much, and for a public that really believes that Ukraine is still winning, right? It would make sense. So it would behoove them to return even more dead bodies than the Ukrainians. I mean, Russian soldiers versus Ukrainian soldiers. They would have to go to the same lengths that the Russians do.
well, every time this
But
conversation comes up, it comes back to the same thing. The Ukrainians are in a damned if you do, damned if you don't position because either they don't have the bodies to exchange or they're deliberately refusing to.
hmm hmm yeah, yeah, but I still don't understand the logic. Why would you do that? Like, why would you do that?
No, it because there is no logic behind it.
There
It's
is no, yeah, they're suffering greater casualties. Now, I will say this, and maybe because they've almost halved the number of dead, I will say this. Um, Apparently, the Ukrainians now have like an early warning system for fab bombs. This is again according to Weeb Union. And he has contacts with some of these people. He's friends with some of the other mappers who have much more inroads with these groups connected to either front. So I'm simply going by what he's saying. So that might have been playing a role,
yes.
for May. I don't know if it's May's not done yet, so I don't know. We're only halfway through May, so we'll see.
Yeah, we will, and it's yeah. But I'll back up what you say on Weeb Union. Not that I've actually ever spoken to the guy, but from what I have observed, I should say, he works with good information.
He does, and he's very careful. He's extremely careful and conservative about these things because you kind of have to be, right? Like people's lives are at stake. It's just something that you one needs to do.
Yes, and it's one of those things where you can't expend all of your credibility by making these grandiose claims, and that's why, for example, sources like Deep State are almost universally mocked at this point, even by even more
Hmm, hmm.
pro-Ukraine people. Even as far as like pro-Ukraine goes, I think it's AMK or whatever actually does a pretty good job from what I keep up with.
Yeah, I think he does.
But yeah, but point being is, and I'm sure you can speak to this because you're the map guy when it comes to our Ukraine segments. But when it comes to curating this information, it is a lot of chaff to get to the wheat.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's not easy, right? And it's and I know how incredibly frustrating it is not to know, right? But some things it takes decades to find out, and some things, you just never find out, and it's just one of those things we have to be content with.
Yeah, and it's a matter of being able to take the information we have and analyze based on what we have with that on a larger picture because we could spend all day talking about casualty numbers, ratios, whatever, but at least what I try to do with this program, and I imagine we're probably on the same page with this one, is to actually take all this information that we go over through in the minutia minute and actually answer the question, well, what does any of this mean? Why does it matter?
Hmm.
Which is why we always springboard it into our Europe segment, into our Russia segment. But I see you have a couple more maps before we get too
Yeah,
sidetracked.
yeah,
If you just want to wipe those out.
yes. Let's finish it. Let's finish it up. So, the Sumy Northern Front. The Russians are still fighting in this region of Ulyanove. Um, Very small gain. You can go to the blow up. They're expanding outwards from the town of Sopich. Um, Sopich. Yeah, it's Sopich. And then finally, there were some gains that the Russians had in Konstantinovka. I'm sorry, this is the best map I've got at the moment. But they have made major inroads into Konstantinovka, and this happened before the ceasefire. I have not heard that much after the ceasefire, so it was an area that just wasn't updated, you know.
Yeah,
But now we have a slightly better idea. So Konstantinovka is very pivotal. There's no way to go up north to Slavyansk and Kramatorsk without first taking Konstantinovka.
yeah, it's the gateway city, and once that falls, I'm not going to put a time frame on it. Then the question of the Donbass front coming to an end actually starts to look a little more concrete. Some people say end of this year, but like I said, it's dangerous to make these kind of predictions. And this is all while, at least in my observation, it seems like a lot of the fighting is being diverted either north or south from Donbass.
Hmm, hmm.
And what I will say, one prediction I will make is once we get a clear picture on the Donbass front, once Konstantinovka falls, and however long that takes, however hard of a battle it is, we're going to get a much clearer picture of the Russian objectives there. Is it really just the four oblasts and a ramshackled peace agreement? Is it going further? Is it outright regime change in Kiev? Is it a buffer zone that goes all the way to Odessa and effectively seizes the Black Sea coast as victory conditions? Once that Donbass front is resolved, I think we'll get a much clearer picture of what the Kremlin's endgame is here. Because, especially in the past, I've noticed the discourse the past few months regarding the Russia Ukraine war has really been a series of question marks. And that's because a lot of people for both good and, let's just say, less accurate reasons. We're expecting some big spring offensive to either have already taken place or to be imminent. And
Hmm.
like I said, I think the idea that something like that would happen is not unreasonable, despite the fact that I never thought it was going to happen. But with all that being said, a lot of people were anticipating that, whether rightly or wrongly, or with good information or bad information, and it never came. So a lot of them were just left waiting, left wanting, left expecting a lot more than what actually ended up happening. But ultimately, the Russian strategy has remained mostly unchanged when in terms of just a slow grind of the fortress cities. But people are questioning the long-term Russian plan, and that, of course, is combined with the rumor mill, especially coming out of the Western media, that Putin is on the ropes, that he's going to
Oh
be
yeah.
that Shoigu, he's building up his coup already. He's performing necromancy to get
You
what's
can
his name, Prigozhin, to overthrow the Russian government.
you can tell. I mean, one of the things that, like, people on the right in the West will say is, we are the most propagandized population in the world. Maybe that's ever existed, and they have a point. But have you ever seen a people that love the propaganda more? I haven't.
No,
I mean, they absolutely love it. Now, I have two friends that constantly send me slop, right? Like, I have to look at people formulating like stupid arguments, like the kind that make me upset when Geo's on the show. I'm not upset with Geo, but those are the times when I
but yes,
go off
the
on
stuff that he brings
like
out.
stuff, right? Like like he doesn't do it, right? But obviously, I feel like I can talk
Yeah,
about it
it,
when he's on the show, because the show is
he's great to
when
bounce
he's
these things off of, is what you're getting at, and I agree.
I do, because like Geo is more interested in a larger picture and less of the minutia of the military and
You'll notice we
y-
skip the minutia minute when he's on.
yeah, like I try to make it as fast as possible. Like, that's still dependent upon what the news front uses, but in any case, I have to deal with like stupid. I have to deal with friends of mine sending me articles or just TikTok videos or Instagram videos of people making arguments I heard like in 2014. It's like, and I've asked them, please stop. I'm not watching this. I literally don't care what they have to say. I don't care how sad they are. I don't care. I don't care if they think you create. I don't care. I don't watch it. Right. But it's particularly these people. Like, he sent me one of a British guy, and he's saying Ukraine is there are people, and he's not Ukrainian. He's British. He's not like a Brit of Ukrainian descent saying this. Like, talk about like you know having an identity that's so porous, you literally become other people. It boggles my mind. But that, and like I say, there's never been a population that has been so propagandized and loved it. Absolutely loved it. Of course, not everybody loves it,
A
obviously, right?
concerning amount of people
We've
do.
we and the people we've collaborated with. Obviously, this is
Yes,
incredibly frustrating.
but it is unfortunately a problem, especially in the Anglophone countries, where a lot of people, even people who are ostensibly on the right side of things, both in the political sense and in the uh, sense of right in the literal meaning of the word,
Hmm.
do get swept up in it. And I'm sure there's times I've been swept up in it, and I try not to. If anyone wants to point it out, I will address that. I will issue any retractions that I feel necessary from that. But once again, not to dwell on this point here. Um, with all of this, it's the idea that Putin is going to be overthrown all of a sudden, that Prigozhin is going to march on Moscow again, despite being 3 years in the grave. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Hmm.
But what I do think is seriously happening is I do think there is a level of frustration with the one-sided escalation ladder that NATO is climbing in Ukraine, and the Russians are not responding in kind. And I understand the picture that the Russians have here. They don't want to take the bait because that's what it is. It is begging them to strike a drone factory in, I don't know, Latvia or wherever. It is begging them to take
Yes.
some sort of retaliatory measures against the Germans, the Poles, the Romanians, because that's Article 5 right there. And people get a little in the weeds when we talk about Article 5. Now, I think first and foremost we have to mention Article 5 technically does not mandate any sort of military response from the other members of NATO. It's simply a question of support, and support is a very broad term. It could be a pat on the back saying, like, I got you, buddy. Have fun in your war with Russia. But with all that being said, it does open up a whole new level of escalation for NATO if the Russians are to respond even somewhat in kind. Because the Americans are not going to divert everything to put another army on continental Europe and march towards Moscow. That's not going to happen. The time it would take to get the industrial and logistical base set up to even do that would take years at this point, if we could even manage to pull it off. And what it does do, though, what Article 5 would do in this scenario, is it would let the smaller players and more regional players in Europe act with more, with the larger toolkit, so to speak. Poland could do more. Romania could do
Hmm.
more. And of course, these are the nations that are going to be sacrificed first. These are the nations that are going to be sent in the meat grinder first. And it's going to gradually work its way. It would be a war managed from Germany, and they would be able to draw on the resources of the rest of Europe, and they would be the coordinators. I'm not saying the Germans themselves would necessarily be fighting it, but they simply have the logistics and the resources out of anyone in continental Europe in order to coordinate any sort of anti-Russia coalition war if such a thing were to take place. Which I think, with the path that we're on right now, I talked about Friedrich Merz last week. I talked about the situation in Latvia last week, and an update on that is that the Latvian Prime Minister, let me get her
Yeah.
name here.
Evika Selina.
Yes, Ivica Salina has resigned as a result of that. Uh,
Yeah, she resigned on what was it, Thursday?
yes, she resigned on Thursday. And I suppose the best part about this is that Finland and the Baltic states are supposed to be the spearhead. They're supposed to be the ones that are the bait for Russia. However, they're very
Yes.
enthusiastic about it while
Yeah,
also being
yeah.
the primary, I don't know if you want to say victims, but the primary uh, people affected by the fallout of this war. Not in even a military sense, because right now you can read the economic reports out of the Baltic states and Finland. They're bleak, even worse than Germany. And now I know Germany is supposed to be the economic engine of the continent, so it's a different question. But all kinds of shortages, fuel shortages, energy shortages. These countries that realized they actually had a quite robust economic relationship with Russia are now, I'll just say it, languishing because of this current war, which the more that happens, the more their ire is directed towards Russia, which creates a very dangerous self perpetuating cycle. And of course, all of these are NATO members, which makes them perfect for provocation. And then you combine that with drones being launched from their territory. And it is the perfect storm to get in a no reverse gear situation that drives continental Europe into war with Russia. And
Hmm.
I've been hammering on this for quite a while now, weeks if not months. But this is a point. I'm not trying to be dramatic. This is a point I am seriously concerned with. That in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be a war between a coalition of continental European powers and Russia that nobody will win. And the Russians clearly have the military advantage. They have the experience advantage, and they would probably win in the most literal sense. But point being is that is a cataclysmic war for them regardless, which is why they've been so hesitant to say increase their own aggression towards Europe proper. which is why they have held back with a lot of these things, which is why they have taken it on the chin when Storm Shadows or any of these other Scout missiles or any of these other European systems get fired by NATO personnel into Russia proper, into the internationally recognized borders of Russia. Because they know that, sure, they could win, but at what cost? Whereas
Yeah.
the continental Europe, increasingly so, among the elites, which unfortunately has trickled down to a certain level of the populace. I'm not saying a critical level, but a concerning level of the populace. I'll just put it that way. Have looked at the scenario. They were promised an easy victory with Russia in 2022. Ukraine's going to break the back of the Russian bear, and it's going to be just a free range to plunder Russia, which of course the American corporations would get first choice over, thus cementing Europe even further into the American sphere, which none of them ever seem to see that's the end game of that. But they were promised an easy victory in the spoils of war. Now that they're engaged with it, they've burned virtually every bridge for any sort of peaceful settlement with Russia. And Russia, which had been quite patient, love them or hate them. Once again, one's personal opinion on Russia needs to be set aside to look at the fact that they were objectively very patient with the Europeans over the course of this war, have recently started to at least diplomatically respond in kind with the same sort of isolation treatment where we're done making these deals, we'll honor the contracts we have. You want to be free of Russian gas by 2027? Well, you'll be free of Russian gas by 2027 because we're not selling you anymore.
Well, they've actually stopped the transportation of Kazakh oil to Europe. They've literally just turned off the pipe.
Yeah, and that is also combined with their, I don't know if you want to call it reconciliation, but their negotiations with the Azeris to also throttle that. Now, I know the Azeris have pipelines that go through Turkey into Europe, so that's not the only way, but
Mm-hmm.
Russia is responding in kind. It is turning the levers that it has. Nord Stream gets blown up, which admittedly was an American-led project, but still, Nord Stream gets blown up. Europeans vow to get off Russian gas by 2027 or whatever stupid pledge they've made, and the Russians
And you
say,
know, and they still. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
"No,
they
please
still
do."
break their own records.
They,
Like they break their own records and surpassing them. Like, how are they getting? Like, how are they getting? Continue getting like Russian oil and gas? Like, um, in Russia they have like an oil market. It's called the Urals something. Um, yeah, on the back of okay, the Urals price for oil, May oil tax calculations. It's set to be like the highest. So the end of 2023, near the end, not the last 2 months or so, but let's say October, Russia had the most. So you're talking late 2023. The war is already a year and a half old, right? And then it kind of petered out and it remained level at a roughly 6,000 rubles per barrel. I'm not sure how it works exactly. And then there was a dip, and the dip began to happen in around the second or third month of 2025, and a new plateau was reached. This plateau was slightly better than early and mid 2023. I'll send you the file, but like for all the Ukrainian attacks, as I said, they attacked Ryazan in Russia. They also killed four civilians by using drones on high rises. It's not it's not like doing anything. Like the Russians are approaching the best time they ever had, which was in the last quarter of 2023. Right, there was you can see the downward trend from from early 2025. But do go on.
I'm glad you brought all this up because the ultimate point I'm trying to get to with European Russian relations being this sour is, I think, a historical point that a lot of people overlook. Now, what's interesting about World War II is for as much as it's mythologized, people actually know very little about the reality of it. and about the actual historical events and the historical beats that went into it. They learned the mythology, and a lot of people, I think rightfully so, reject it because they realize they've been fed just a false religion. And like I said, I completely understand that, but at the same time, that does taint them from actually learning about what did happen. And I think one of the most interesting things to look at, putting aside ideology, ideas, rhetoric, whatever, is the actual concrete relationship that existed between Germany and the Soviet Union in the lead up to the 1941 war.
Hmm.
And that is, everyone knows about Molotov-Ribbentrop, that they divided Europe into spheres of influence, that it was the Mackinder Nightmare, that they had established the so-called joint condominium over Central and Eastern Europe. The nightmare of the Anglo-American Axis come to fruition. And of course it didn't last. And what a lot of people forget about that is, as part of that agreement, as part of the broader framework of German and Soviet relations from the late 1930s up until the German invasion of the Soviet Union, is they had a very robust economic relationship. There were Soviet oil, Soviet fuel in the tanks of the German aircraft
Yeah.
bombing the Soviet Union in June of 1941. So, if they can have such a robust economic relationship up until the day war breaks out, quite literally the day war breaks out, and you look at the current state of relations, both economically and diplomatically, between the Europeans and the Russians, in my opinion, it paints a far bleaker picture.
Hmm.
And I don't look. I have a pessimistic disposition. I think anyone who's been listening to this show long enough realizes that. But I don't try to make this program a non-stop stream of doom and gloom. But when I look at all of these factors combined, when I look at everything going on, when I look at the microcosm of, say, Poland and Belarus, or Russia and the Baltic states, or any number of these flashpoints in Europe, Kaliningrad's another one, I can only see conflict between Europe and Russia in the next 5 to 10 years, which is, I said it in previous episodes, I'll say it again, which I'll be honest, is a suicide pact. And I don't expect the Russians to come crawling back to Europe. The Europeans have burned them, I think, far more than once. That's not a
Yeah.
question at all. The Europeans have burned themselves in the process of burning Russia. But we're now in a position, it seems like, barring what mass regime change overnight in major European Union countries, there is no path to reconciliation, which unfortunately means we either get a very cold, fragile peace, which certainly beats war, or we get the hot war, which, given the behavior and rhetoric of the continental Europeans, or Europe as a whole, because the British certainly are not innocent in all of this, I shouldn't just say continental Europeans, but who's going to be doing the fighting and the dying? It's continental Europeans, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, before it creeps west. But point being is, now you're getting the Russian officials somewhat responding in kind. I'm not going to say it's to the same level, but they are starting to pick up on those threads. And a lot of that could be rhetoric. I hope it is rhetoric. But then there's the question, coming back to Ukraine, once there is a settlement in this conflict, you have the pledges from France, from Germany, from whoever else they can get in their so-called coalition, the willing, depending on the week, saying we're going to send our coalition into post-war Ukraine in order to manage the situation, in which case they're effectively saying the rump state of Ukraine will be admitted into NATO. And that
Hmm.
right there is every motivation the Russians need to keep this conflict ongoing until they have secured all their strategic objectives, in which case it's only a matter of time. I would assume Odessa is it. I can't say for certain, but given the 2030 timeline from the Europeans, that is, given Russia's current strategic position, given the rhetoric out of Europe, what I fear is being game planned in Europe. I'm not saying it will play out, but what I fear the Europeans think will play out and will respond accordingly is that the Russians arrive in Odessa by 2030, at which point Europe is militarized enough to go into the rump state of Ukraine, to hold that line pretty much until the inevitable happens, until there's just one cross-border skirmish, in which case you get that giant continental war that they've been planning, let's be honest, since 1993.
I think that makes a lot of sense, right? As we've said on this show many times, is Israel, well, the other Israel,
Oy vey.
Ukraine is there to give Europe time to manage this. Now, in maybe a counter argument that could be made is Europe and America are still not where they need to be, militarily speaking, particularly with the question of ordinances, in order to fight the kind of war, because this war would be even larger than the war in Ukraine. It would be 3 times larger. It really would be World War III, in the vein of as far as numbers are concerned.
Can I propose a morbid
But
counterpoint?
it's simply not there yet.
What
Yeah, go ahead.
what I fear is the case is Polish and
Yeah.
Romanian bodies will hold the line, while Western industry kicks back into gear to get the war going off in earnest.
Mm.
In which case, it'll be similar scale to what we see in Ukraine right now, probably a little larger, of drones and infantry marching to the slaughter while Western Europe figures out its artillery situation. Which I'm not saying is a possibility. Well, I am saying it is a possibility. I'm not saying it's a certainty, but it is something I fear given the rhetoric and given the behind the scenes actions, frankly, that they've been taking. That they are willing to pour bodies in there. They're willing to rack up casualties in the hundreds of thousands until they can get that on the line. That you're just going to have men stand in the breach and that they're going to have all kinds of propaganda about how the brave men standing in the breach at the gates of European civilization, etc., etc. We have to do our part. We need to completely shift over to a war economy with our dilapidated industry, what's left of it, post sanctions, and then uh, worse follows worse in that case. And like I said, I'm trying not to just be a sheer pessimist about all of this, but
Mm.
given all the information, I would love a counterpoint. If somebody has a coherent counterpoint to why they think Europe is not going to march into its final destruction in the next 5 to 10 years, I would love to hear it. Because I know this probably sounds very dramatic. This probably sounds very alarmist to certain people. In which case, like I said, I hope you are right. I hope I am being alarmist here. But and this is something I've held back on for a while. 2022, 2020.
Mm-mm.
This is something, a conclusion I've come to really since Valdai. And I think once Valdai happened, once they showed that they are willing to do a head of state assassination in Russia, that all bets are off. Because before it had been tempered, the Ukrainians had had their irregular attacks backed by NATO intelligence agencies into Russia, but nothing quite of that level. But once that line was crossed, once we saw that Trump was not going to get the so called peace deal, once we saw that the shelving of the Ukraine conflict, quote unquote, was not on the table in any realistic sense, that's when these fears started developing for me. And that is the basis of my more recent analysis, I would say,
Mm.
since January, February of this year.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Um, America will expect Europe to die for them.
Yeah, this is what I mean when they say liquidate the vassals.
Yeah, because I think it was on the gaggle. One of the two said, or maybe it was Peter Lavelle. He said, "If you think that America is going to sacrifice Memphis for Warsaw, you're crazy."
Oh no, absolutely not.
Like Memphis. I, I mean, they're not comparable, but to America, that's their city, and they're not going to sacrifice Memphis for Warsaw or Prague for that matter.
I mean, this goes all the way back to the 1960s. There were allegations, rumors, if you want to say, that in the event of another war in continental Europe between NATO and the Warsaw Pact, that the Americans
Yes.
would not directly intervene, and I
Yep.
believe that
Yep.
because that was the model from.
I mean, if you're going to believe Hexeth, and I know there's an argument why you shouldn't, but he did say February 2025. It's been almost a year and a half. America is not going to go into Ukraine, but a contingent, he mentioned, like a contingent of Europeans could go there. Of course, after peace was settled. But see, that's the part that can be fudged a little bit. That's the part that can have improvisation. But the part about America going in, no way.
And let me just put it this way: the Europeans have wanted the quote unquote American backstop to bolster their
Yeah.
Ukrainian quote unquote peacekeeping project. Now, I also take Hegseth at his word for this one instance because I don't think he has any reason to lie or exaggerate the truth here. But what I do think, if we're talking a 5 to 10 year timeline, is let's just say Gavin Newsom because he's an easy place filler until we get an actual Democratic frontrunner.
Yeah.
Gavin Newsom makes the backstop guarantee, and then he pulls it when it
He
matters
would do
most.
it.
Yeah,
I think he would do it.
I think he would make it. I don't think he'd live up to it, but he would give the Europeans the guarantee to send them in, and then when they call on that backstop, he would pull out because America would be doing whatever with
Hmm.
the East Asian theater or the Middle Eastern theater. But yeah,
That's very that's
Europe's in
very
a war
that's a
now.
very interesting take. It's a very interesting take.
And it's also I think it's par for the course with the Americans that they're going to make you this guarantee that yeah, we have your back, don't worry, we're right behind you if the Russians get
Psych.
involved. Yeah, and then have fun, Britain, France, Germany, Poland, Romania. It's your war now. We'll sell you arms at an exorbitant rate, but other than that. Oh, sorry. We need to withhold those arms. We need to go for round 30 against Iran at that point. And I think you're kidding yourself. Anyone out there who thinks that Newsom wouldn't be just as dedicated to, say, a certain lobby in the Middle East as Trump. Maybe slightly less, but
The only
It would be
reason
there.
I could be persuaded to disagree with you is because it just seems like it was always more of a Democrat project than a Republican one. Ironically speaking, simply because I think the Republicans prioritize Israel and the Democrats prioritize Ukraine. You can see why they're pet projects,
Yeah,
right?
look, it's the same group of people with different ethnic grievances. Some of them hold a grudge against the old country. Some of them want to continue the new country project, as it were.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Blinken was a perfect example of that. Well, Blinken was certainly a Zionist; he was pro-Israel, but you'll notice his
Yes.
ire was towards the Germans and the Russians. He never forgave them for.
And
Uh,
the Serbs.
oh, of course. Yeah, Madeleine Albright. We're only going to
Right. And
shelter you.
he absolutely despised the Russians.
Yeah,
Remember what he said? Remember what he said? Oh, best of luck in your old age. And um, well, maybe you should call up the Chinese for deals. And like literally now, China is eating your lunch.
I'm gonna say something positive about Rubio. He's not Tony Blinken.
Yeah.
Look, Rubio is just a suit. I'll give him that much. Blinken was detestable.
Yeah, yeah. I hated him. Partly because he had a certain sophistication about him.
Yeah,
Um
uh,
and,
he
and because shit libs respected him to a certain degree. Of course,
he was
everything
Morgenthau.
after October 2023 changed.
Yeah,
I mean,
Blinken
all these people are non grata right now.
Blinken was Morgenthau's dream come true. It was just that simple.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What ravage Germany and get on a war footing with Russia. Morgenthau could not have been prouder. It's
Mm.
really just that simple, and that's why I find Blinken probably one of the most detestable Secretary of State, even more so than Hillary Clinton, by the way. But that is a conversation for a different day. But I agree with you. Ukraine, the project of NATO expansion, is much more explicitly a Democrat project. However, I don't put it past the Democrats to pull a fast one on their quote unquote European allies once they get them in the position they want them in, is my ultimate point.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you. Um, and the Europeans are not able to see through this because I mean that is one of the drawbacks of Europe is is the revenge fantasy, the way certain countries cannot accept a defeat. 300 years later, there's something.
Are you telling me the
There's
Poles are going to march on Moscow again?
Yes, they will. Oh, they'll march.
Yeah, I mean, and I say that only somewhat jokingly because I do have a pretty big soft spot for the Poles as a people. It's just that they have a very self-destructive tendency throughout their history. I'll just say that much.
Well, one of the things that happened, unfortunately, in Poland is they've recognized a gay marriage.
Thank you, George Soros. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so apparently these two gay men got married in Germany. And of course, Germany's also gone bonkers because the Catholic Church in Germany is in danger of splitting again, but gay Luther this time.
Wait,
Um,
what was the first time then?
just Luther. But you know, um, they're I don't know what the right term is, but they're synod, or basically the Roman Catholic Church in Germany is like bordering on recognizing gay marriage, as far as I understand. In any case, they got married in Germany, and I don't know if it was in a Roman Catholic church or not, but their marriage was upheld. It was legally upheld.
Thank you, Donald Tusk. Thank you, Karol Nawrocki.
This is what I mean.
You're
If
doing wonders.
you you really have to hate Russia more than defending your own culture and civilization.
That really is all it comes down to. That they would rather freeze to death. That they would rather have all the rainbow parades and everything, so long as it meant getting one over on the Russians. Because you know what? At least Putin didn't win, and that's all it comes down to. That is all it comes down to. And it is a self-destructive tendency on the part of these nations, and it's really sad to see.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point you're making, because remember a few weeks ago, I think Gio was on the show, or might have been a week before or after he was on the show. I made a comment that, in a certain forum, I had said that I think Ukraine is resigned now, that they will lose the war, but rather than just lose the war, it's better that they and Russia are destroyed than just themselves. And in a way, I think that there are a lot of Europeans who potentially, now that you describe Poland in this way, uh, who are also willing to, if there cannot be a Europe without Russia, then there's no point. There has to be a Europe without Russia. I think that's the argument,
Yeah, they'll just
and,
sink the
and they're
entire
they're
ship,
willing to self-destruct to do it.
which is insane.
Insane.
It's and especially given the history that, look, I know that Europe and proper and Russia have not always seen eye to eye. In fact, many times they have not, but they've managed to coexist for centuries now, and even at sometimes having Russia part of the so-called European family. Why they'd want to be part of that today, I don't know. I don't think they do, and it makes sense given the state of modern Europe. But point being is they have worked themselves into, if I can make such a blunt historical comparison, the logical conclusion of the Crimean War, that if you so much as cross our arbitrary boundaries, we're going to side with anyone up into including the Caliph himself, the largest Islamic empire in the world, to destroy you. And I think that's also part of the grand strategy in terms of Central Asia and Turkey, where they also want to provoke a conflict with Russia there as well. And one could cynically argue, this train of thought I've played with that I don't buy into, that some of the more pro Palestine rhetoric coming out of Europe in particular is to soften the image of Europe to the Muslims, and also to try to build the equivocation of Russia and Israel as well. Look at what Russia did in Chechnya. Look at blah blah blah, where
Yeah,
they
you didn't have to fund Chechnya. Russia wasn't doing anything to Chechnya
yeah,
before.
exactly. And
You're the one who sponsored a separatist movement.
that I fear is part of the broader strategy. We have Gladio proper in Europe, but that they're going to try to revive, say, the Islamic Gladio, like what they did with Bin Laden and the so-called Mujahideen and all these other groups here. And I mean, that's a project they've done for years. They've worked with these jihadist groups for years, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the near future that they try to direct their ire towards the Russians. And in many ways, Syria was a trial ground for that because it was, in a roundabout way, exactly that. Now, there were other interests in Syria at play beyond that, but point being is that's one of the other cards they can play in all of this. It's something that they can play against China if they can really work up this Uyghur issue here. But I suppose with the broaching of the subject of Muslims, we should move on to the Middle East and this wonderful
Yeah.
Robert Kagan article.
Yes.
So, just a bit of a preface here with all of this. Robert Kagan, infamous neocon, I believe he is the husband of Victoria Nuland.
Nuland.
So, we're covering all our bases here, all of the best people, with the greatest interests of you and I and everyone listening to this right now. He writes a piece called Checkmate in Iran. And you read this piece, and we're going to in just a moment here. You think, well, that's a moment of sobering clarity from somebody you'd expect to call for the evisceration of Iran. But you start to read into the subtext, you read further in the article. His criticism is that, well, Trump botched the opening phases of the war, so the only solution is to double and triple down.
Yep.
So, let's take a read into this article. Checkmate in Iran. Washington can't reverse or control the consequences of losing this war. Came out on May 10th, so a week from the day that we're going to be premiering.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to think of a time when the United States suffered a total defeat in a conflict, a setback so decisive that the strategic loss could be neither repaired nor ignored. The calamitous losses suffered at Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, and throughout the Western Pacific in the first months of World War II were eventually reversed. The defeats in Vietnam and Afghanistan were costly, but did not do lasting damage to America's overall position in the world, because they were far from the main theaters of global competition. The initial failure in Iraq was mitigated by a shift in strategy that ultimately left Iraq a relatively stable and unthreatening to its neighbors.
Iraq is stable.
I suppose unthreatening is that part is true.
Yeah,
stable and not so much. It kept the United States dominant in the region. Defeat in the present confrontation with Iran will be of an entirely different character. See, he's already speaking in the present tense. He doesn't acknowledge that there has been a defeat yet, which should be tell number one. It can neither be repaired nor ignored. There will be no return to the status quo ante, no ultimate American triumph that will undo or overcome the harm done. The Strait of Hormuz will not be quote-unquote opened as it once was. With control of the strait, Iran emerges as the key player in the region and one of the key players in the world. The roles of China and Russia as Iran's allies are strengthened. The role of the United States substantially diminished. Far from demonstrating American prowess, as supporters of the war repeatedly claim, the conflict has revealed an America that is unreliable and incapable of finishing what it started. That is going to set off a chain reaction around the world as friends and foes adjust to America's failure. Yep. See, notice that he feeds you a very reasonable line at first. This sounds like something that you would say, I would say, that Colonel McGregor might even say. But to continue, President Trump likes to talk about who has the quote-unquote cards. But whether he has any good ones left to play is not clear. The United States and Israel pounded Iran with devastating effectiveness for 37 days, killing much of the country's leadership and destroying the bulk of its military. Yet it couldn't collapse the regime or even exact the smallest concession from it. I wonder why. Now Trump and the Trump administration hopes that blockading Iran's ports will accomplish what massive force could not. It's possible, of course, but a regime that could not be brought to its knees by 5 weeks of unrelenting military attack is unlikely to buckle in response to the economic pressure alone. Nor does it fear the anger of its populace. As the Iran scholar Susan Maloney recently noted, a regime that slaughtered its own citizens and silent protesters in January is fully prepared to impose economic hardships on them now. Is Iran imposing the economic hardships? Is that the takeaway here?
Yeah, he didn't have to attack them.
Yeah.
Nobody said you have to. I mean, Netanyahu said you have to attack them. So.
Look, that's the most important voice in the room, but it hasn't been the decades of sanctions that has imposed economic hardships on Iran. It has been the Iranian leadership refusing to buckle at the demands of Bibi Netanyahu. Some supporters of the war are therefore calling for the resumption of military strikes, but they cannot explain how another round of bombing will accomplish what 37 days of bombing did not. More military action will inevitably lead Iran to retaliate against its neighboring Gulf states. The war's advocates have no response to that either. Trump halted attacks on Iran not because he was bored or because Iran was striking the region's vital oil and gas facilities, but because Iran was striking the region's vital oil and gas facilities. The turning point came on March 18th when Israel bombed Iran's South Pars gas field and Iran retaliated by attacking Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city, the world's largest natural gas export plant, causing damage to production capacity that will take years to repair. Trump responded by declaring a moratorium on further strikes against Iran's energy facilities and then declaring a ceasefire despite Iran not having made a single concession. Wow. Well, jump in whenever you have a point to make, by the way. So I'll continue.
So far, I agree with everything. I can't wait for the part where he says, "This is why we have to send 1 million men." This is why we have to reintroduce the draft.
Courtesy of Palantir, by the way. But continuing, the risk calculus that forced Trump to back down a month ago still holds. Even if Trump were to carry out his threat to destroy Iran's, I like how he puts civilization, quote unquote, as if it's not one of the longest continuing nations in world history. Come on. I don't know, unless the implication was about Trump destroying their civilization. But either way, that's the way it reads to me, that he's downplaying the idea that Iran has a civilization, which it's just absurd.
Yeah.
Through more bombing, Iran would still be able to launch many missiles and drones before its regime went down, assuming it did go down. Just successful strikes to cripple the region's oil and gas infrastructure for years, if not decades, like it already has, throwing the world and the United States into a prolonged economic crisis, like it probably already has. Even if Trump wanted to bomb Iran as part of an exit strategy, looking tough as a way of masking his retreat, he can't do that without risking catastrophe. If this isn't checkmate, it's close. In recent days, Trump has reportedly asked U.S. intelligence community to assess the consequences of simply declaring victory and walking away. You can't blame him. Hoping for regime collapse is not much of a strategy, especially when the regime had already survived repeated military and economic pummeling. The guy who's been advocating to doing this for 40 years has the audacity to say that, by the way. That's something you need to keep in mind as I read this article. But, to continue, it could fall tomorrow, or 6 months from now, or not at all. Trump doesn't have that much time to wait. As oil climbs to $150 or even $200 a barrel, inflation rises, and a global food and other commodity shortage kicks in. He needs a faster resolution. But any resolution other than America's effective surrender holds enormous risks that Trump has not been so far willing to take. Those who glibly call on Trump to quote-unquote finish the job, as you will soon, rarely acknowledge the costs. Unless the U.S. is prepared to engage in a full-scale ground and naval war to remove the current Iranian regime, then to occupy Iran until a new government can take hold, unless it's prepared to risk the loss of warships convoying tankers through a contested strait, unless it's prepared to accept the devastating long-term damage to the region's productive capacity likely to result from Iranian retaliation, walking away could seem like the least bad option. As a political matter, Trump may well feel he has a better chance riding out defeat than surviving a much larger, longer, and more expensive war that could still end in failure. To continue, defeat for the United States, therefore, is not only possible but likely. Here's what defeat would look like. Iran remains in control of the Strait of Hormuz. The common assumption that, one way or another, the strait will reopen when the crisis ends is unfounded. Iran has no interest in maintaining the status quo ante. People talk of a split between hardliners and moderates in Tehran. But even the moderates must understand that Iran cannot afford to let the strait go, no matter how good of a deal it thought it could get. For one thing, how reliable is any deal with Trump, or any other American leader? He all but boasted about replicating the Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor by approving the killing of Iran's leadership amid negotiations. The Iranians cannot be sure that Trump won't decide to attack again within a few months of striking a deal. They also know that the Israelis may attack again, as if as they never felt constrained from acting when they perceive their interests are threatened, and Israel's interests will be threatened. As many Iran experts have noted, the regime in Tehran currently stands to emerge from the crisis much stronger than it was before the war, having not only retained its potential nuclear capacity, but also gained control of an even more effective weapon, the ability to hold the global energy market hostage. When when Iranians talk of reopening the strait, they still mean to keep the strait under their control. Iran will be not only Iran will be able to not only demand tolls for passage, but to limit transit to those nations with which it had good relations. If a nation behaves in a way Iran's rulers don't like, they will be able to exact punishment merely by slowing or even threatening to slow the flow of a nation's cargo ship in and out of the straits. No other nation would leverage such power that way. Not at all.
Yeah.
The power to close or control the flow of the ships through the strait is a greater and more immediate threat than the theoretical power of Iran's nuclear program. This leverage will allow the leaders in Tehran to force nations to lift sanctions and to normalize relations or face penalties. Israel will find itself more isolated than ever as Iran grows richer, rearms, and preserves its options to go nuclear in the future. It may even find itself unable to go after Iran's proxies, kind of like they already are now. I mean, look at their current success rate against Hamas and Hezbollah. That does not paint a good picture, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. This is what makes Israel, the Greater Israel Project, especially defined by Professor Jiang, so unbelievable, right? Like in
Yeah,
the
I believe they
80s,
want
Israel
it,
could,
but
yeah, I know they wanted, but is in the in the 80s, early 80s, Israel took Beirut and stood and stayed there for many, many years. Now, when they left in 2000, they no longer controlled Beirut. I just don't remember when they left Beirut, but they remained in the south.
yes,
And the reason they left in 2000, I said 2020, I meant 2000, was the amount of casualties that they took, right? And their population has, I mean, yes, they have a high birth rate amongst their own, that's challenges that of the Palestinian population, both within Israel and within Palestine. But most of them don't join the military, or a good portion of them do not.
yeah, the Hasidics do a lot of carrying of the demographic weight, and they're also some of the least contributing members of society.
Right. Now, you're supposed to believe that this area that's like 100 times larger than present day Israel, right, is going to happen only once, according to Professor Jiang, once America leaves the Middle East. Like he said, and the only reason I bring him up now and in the past was just to see what he says is going to come true. On the one hand, he said most recently, like 2 shows back, I brought it up when Gio was on the show, that um, the war is not going to resume. On the other hand, he also said months earlier that there is going to be a ground invasion, and this will be the event. And of course, Kagan is talking about this as well, though I don't think he pays any attention to Professor Jiang. And this is going to be the defining moment when America finally leaves Iran. Iran and America will be significantly debilitated as two powerful nations. Of course, Iran is much more powerful, but in any case, this will cause the retreat of America from the Middle East, and it will only be then that, without constraints, it's real. Who's going to pay for all these munitions that Israel keeps running out of? Like the 12-day war proved that their manufacturing isn't up for an extended period of time, a protracted war. And so did 40 days of battle in 2026. They both proved the same thing. So when is this going to happen?
It simply isn't. That's what
Right.
yeah, the Greater Israel Project, insofar as it's even viable.
But Kagan has a point.
Yes,
He thinks that Trump could be pressured in, or somebody could be pressured in, to go in. I'm not so sure Trump can right now. I'm not. I don't think there's no way in 2026, unless it's like the end of December, he's going to announce a ground invasion of Iran. I can't see it happening.
there's just no.
I could be totally wrong, but
I agree with you, and like I said, I think we share the same similar pessimistic disposition about these kind of things, but it's just simply not in the realm of possibility as far as I'm concerned.
yeah.
But to continue, in a world where Iran wields influence over energy supplies of so many nations, Israel could face enormous international pressure not to provoke Tehran in Lebanon, Gaza, or anywhere else. The new status quo in the Strait on occasion, will also occasion a substantial shift in relative power and influence both regionally and globally. In the region, the United States will have proved itself a paper tiger, forcing the Gulf and other Arab states to accommodate Iran. Already now we have reports of the Saudis, according to the Financial Times, entering into talks for Iran for a mutual non-aggression agreement. Now we saw what happened with their last attempts at reconciliation, but maybe this time it's different. And I'm not saying that as a throwaway line. I'm saying, given the consequences of everything that's happened in the past 2 months, perhaps it really is different this time. But
Yeah, 2026 is very different than June 2025. You
absolutely,
could make that argument. It doesn't mean you trust them, but maybe you have more reasons to trust them.
yes. And it also just gets down to some of the most basics of these kind of agreements between rivals, where not trusting them, quote unquote, is more costly than trusting them. Where you need to even shake their hand in bad faith because that beats no agreement at all. But with that being said, uh, as for Iran scholars, Rule Garrett and Ray Takei recently wrote, the Gulf Arab economies were built under the umbrella of American hegemony. Take that away, and the freedom of navigation goes with it, and the Gulf states will ineluctably go begging to Tehran. And by extent, probably the Chinese as well, because it was China who was originally brokering the deals between Iran and Saudi Arabia in the
That's right.
first round of thawing. And as we'll talk about Trump's visit to China later, but once again, the Chinese have shown themselves to be, I would argue, a quite formidable force if one didn't already believe they were on the global stage. And I don't just mean that in terms of military power, I mean that in terms of diplomatic power as well. But to continue, they will not be the only ones. All nations that depend on energy from the Gulf will have to work out their own arrangements with Iran. What choice will they have? If the United States, with its mighty navy, can't or won't open the strait, no coalition of forces with just a fraction of the Americans' capability will be able to either. The Anglo-French initiative to police the strait after a ceasefire is a bit of a joke. French President Emmanuel Macron has made it clear that this quote-unquote coalition will operate only under peaceful conditions in the strait. It will escort ships, but only if they don't need an escort. Yet with Iran in control, the strait is not going to be safe for a long time. China presumably has influence over Tehran, but even China cannot force open the strait by itself. Gee, if only there were a way to ensure the strait wasn't closed in the first place.
Now,
I wonder why Kagan doesn't bring that up.
yeah. Now there was this week a ship that was boarded by the Iranians. It was a tanker, however, it was carrying munitions. It was carrying arms, um, basically for the black market. It was a Chinese ship, but it was, I think, the Philippines, a totally different country, was navigating the ship. The crew was not Chinese. I don't know all the details about it, but I thought that was interesting. I'm just bringing it up because I do think there's a limit to what China can say to Iran in order to pressure it to open up the strait. Of course, China has to be thinking strategically. This one little ship is not that big of a deal, obviously, right? Especially when some ships have gone through roughly 40, uh, since let's say the beginning of April, a small amount of course, right? But that is what we know of. Iran is still able to supply oil to China through other routes.
Yes, I don't have the map on hand, but here I'll actually pull that up right now. The so-called New Silk Road through Central Asia. I'll get that one up right here. But yes, here's one of the uh, rail lines they have that goes all the way through Central Asia into China.
Yeah.
Uh, but to continue on the article, uh, one effect of the transformation will be an expanding great power naval race. In the past, most of the world's nations, including China, counted on the United States to both prevent and address such emergencies. Uh, Now, nations in Europe and Asia that depend on access to the Persian Gulf's resources are helpless against the loss of energy supplies that are vital to their economic and political stability. How long can they tolerate this before they start building their own fleets as a means of wielding influence in an every nation for itself world where order and predictability have broken down? Now, I agree that that would be the logical conclusion, but it also underestimates the turnaround it takes to actually make a blue water navy capable of escorting vessels through contested waters.
Mhm.
The amount of manpower and resources and time that takes, we're talking a decade in an optimistic sense, maybe even 20 years depending on that. Now, I don't doubt these shifts can take place, but I'm just saying there are nations that will be able to do it faster, be able to do it more efficiently. There are nations that will be left in the dust, and unfortunately, the European nations are among those who I do not think would be able to field or sail the kind of fleets that are necessary. The British and the French navies, which you once dominated the world, are ghosts of their former selves, and I don't see them being able to recover that, especially if we are to believe that a continental war is right around the corner, which, like I said, that is a large fear of mine, and that's something I do unfortunately think is around the corner. That they're not going to dump their military resources into a fleet that can protect trade, and it really comes up to the Chinese. And I don't foresee China becoming the naval guarantor of the world, as it were. They will protect their own trade interests. But I do agree with the idea that it becomes each nation is responsible for its own vessels, where as the current system continues, the United States will continue to act like a pirate organization, that it will resort to high seas piracy, like we unfortunately predicted, I don't know, about 7 years ago at this point, uh, back in 2019. But to continue, the American defeat in the Gulf will have a broader global ramifications as well. The whole world can see that just a few weeks of war with a second rank power has reduced American weapon stocks to perilously low levels. Nothing happened before that would have contributed, but to continue, with no quick remedy in sight. The question this raises about America's readiness for another major conflict may or may not prompt Xi Jinping to launch an attack on Taiwan or Putin to step up his aggression against Europe. Oh no. But at the very least, American allies in East Asia and Europe must wonder about America's staying power in the event of future conflicts. The global adjustment to a post American world is accelerating. America's once dominant position in the Gulf is just the first of many casualties. And that is the work of Robert Kagan, Arch Neocon, all around great guy, I hear.
I mean, I don't think he even, the sense I get is even he does not believe that this is something that's going to happen.
Oh, of course not. This is him just grasping at straws, hoping that he can see his life's work accomplished before he meets his end. Because I think he's getting up there in age too. He's got to be
And in weight.
that.
The-
Yes.
that could that could accelerate him into
Oh, certainly. Yeah. And also, being married to Victoria Newland would probably also do that as well.
yeah.
A dinner at that household, I could not imagine.
I I have to say it, I think he's the one that got her fat.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. I thought it was all those leftover cookies that she was passing out to the Biden guys.
I think it was him.
So are you saying the Biden cookies were his ideas?
Uh, yeah,
But
probably.
with all that being said, once again, he writes this article with uh, very surface level correct takes on the Iran war, with the conclusion, ultimately, at least the way I read it, is we need to double and triple down, but also with the belief that it's simply not going to happen. And it almost did read towards the end there like a resignation that the American hegemony he had spent his life advocating for and helping build is obsolete and is going to continue to be obsolete going into the future and become less and less relevant. Which
The fall of America will be the most anti-Semitic thing
oh
to
no,
occur since Iran burned that statue of Moloch.
oh no, you can't. I don't know where you put.
Apparently, that guy Rathbone made a comment that when they burned the effigy of Moloch
Yes,
in Iran, he said, "I guarantee you, in a day, someone is going to call this anti-Semitic."
of course they always. What else would they do? What else? Yeah, that's you are right for a number of different reasons that I'm not going to litigate on this platform at least because I know things can be touchy with that. But no, I appreciate your commentary as far as that's concerned. But in many ways, and Kagan would go to his grave not admitting this, the skeptics were justified. The Pat Buchanans and the Ron Pauls of the world were completely justified in their position that, well, surely America cannot manage the globe forever. Surely we have our own interests. Surely we cannot be responsible for making sure any instant in the Strait of Hormuz becomes a global crisis that falls directly under our management because American power is not eternal, and arguably American power should not be used that way. That we are a nation, perhaps with interests. And I think back in the 90s and 2000s when they were making these arguments, there was a little bit more optimism to ride on about America being a nation, but I'm getting in the weeds here. But point being is, all the people who had questioned the imperial scale of America being unsustainable in the long term have been completely vindicated. And then Kagan admits it without admitting it, while at the same time
Yes.
couching it in an argument for further intervention. That if we just double, triple, quadruple down this time, we'll have another American century.
Yeah, one or two is never enough.
Yeah, third time's the charm, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Iraq didn't work out. Afghanistan didn't work out. We have, I don't know, I guess Syria technically
I mean, they
worked
would
out.
argue that it did.
Oh, yeah, of course. And I would
Because
say
they're not a threat to Israel
from
anymore.
from a certain perspective, Iraq was a success. Iraq was neutralized as a threat in the region and turned into effectively a black hole of conflict, where Saddam Hussein, as somebody who could project power in the region against Iran, the Gulf states, and Israel, was removed as a player. So the Iraq War was successful as far as that's concerned, but as far as actual regional stability is concerned, it was a unmitigated disaster, without question. And with all that being said, I suppose this talk of another American century, American imperial humiliation, American retreat, does lead very well into the news out of East Asia this week.
Yeah, it does.
Unless you have any final thoughts on our neoconservative luminary and his wonderful think piece, but
Well, I'll say this, that Robert Kagan has a brother who's also quite influential.
oh, of course he is.
Frederick W. Kagan. And it's he and his wife, Kimberly Kagan, with Anne Applebaum, that started the Institute for the Study of War in 2022. So all these people are very connected. Robert Kagan,
one big happy family.
One big happy family who celebrate Shabbat together. And
does that mean Sikorsky is their Shabbos? You know what?
Of course he is. But Robert Kagan, I think in 2008 wrote an article about how to revive masculinity within the West, within America particularly, by using European paganism. Like when I kid you not, I kid you
Fight as
not.
a
Like
fight.
now, fight as a fight. Yeah. Um, I know it's ridiculous, right? Like when a Jew thinks like, I think it's time we started using Wotan and Zeus and Jupiter and Mars.
Wotan, can you get those at a Chinese
We we
restaurant?
we, we got to get these goys. you know, he's writing this in 2008 when
Hail Odin
you
for
it,
Israel.
yeah. Now the funny thing about Kagan, his I don't know about his mother being Jewish. I don't think she was, but his father Donald Kagan was a Lithuanian Jew.
Oh, so Robert's not a real one.
Yeah, and his father was a Sterling professor of classics and history emeritus at Yale University, and of course Robert Kagan also went to Yale.
Just out of curiosity, do you know when his father left Lithuania?
That's a good question. I don't know.
What was it, Imperial or Soviet era, or is it World War II era?
His father was a specialist on the Peloponnesian War. Like Robert Kagan was actually born in Athens.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah. Like I said, one big happy family where Sikorsky shuts off the lights on Shabbat. Yeah, what a wonderful guy, Radek Sikorsky. He's a real credit to the nation of Poland. I could not say anything more positive about him. But I'm getting lost in the weeds. But with that, all that being said on Kagan, the American century, so to speak, and East Asia, we should talk about the China trip. The namesake of this episode. Donald Trump on the court of Xi Jinping. And you know what? I can't believe it. It's been 10 years, almost 10 years since Trump announced his candidacy. And while we were teased with it before, we finally achieved Nazbol Trump. So for those of you who were doubting, those of you who were
Agent Krasnov.
Agent Krasnov has succeeded.
Yes.
I'm gonna make the joke because I made it to you. I started to talk about how great this is, but then I felt the ghost of Brezhnev breathing down my shoulder, and he set me straight that. But no, I do not think that Donald Trump is going to pry China and Russia apart. It just to clarify the joke there, that's simply not going to happen. But it was a relatively short meeting for what you'd expect the two most powerful men in the world, two of the most powerful men in the world, not necessarily the top two. You could debate.
Can I mention one more factoid about Kagan?
Oh, please do.
Okay. So he didn't like the neocon label.
Oh, of course he didn't.
I think there was a British paper that, but in 2006 he wrote that. Think about this. 2006 he wrote, Russia and China are the greatest challenge to liberalism that liberalism faces today.
Oh no, you can't say that.
Oh no.
Actually, no, you can't say that. That's the right thing to say. And what a prophet! What a prophet! But but with all that being said, Trump and Xi Jinping, two of the titans of the world, met for a 2-day meeting. Now, that was the window dressing, in my opinion, and I'm not the first person to point this out. But very large business and corporate delegations also were part of this meeting in Beijing, and they met. They all rubbed elbows. The last gasps of Chimerica were there. And I'm not saying this is a Chimerica revival, I'm saying quite the opposite. But Trump, who had this meeting planned originally last month, planned on going in with Venezuela in his back pocket and Iran in his back pocket. And he goes there, he shows Xi Jinping, you're two proxies, you're two allies. I scalped them both, and let's make a deal now. But instead, he had a
Mhm.
I guess you could say semi-successful Venezuela operation because Venezuela more or less did capitulate to the United States, even though how much of a victory that is overall is, I think, questionable. And a complete humiliation in Iran. There's no other way to cut it. And they go there for.
And China is still buying some Venezuelan oil. I mean, yes, would China have preferred, but I mean, China has options, is what I'm
Oh yeah,
saying.
that's one of the things that happened when the regime change happened in Venezuela, where I think it was Rubio who said, "Oh, we're not going to interfere with the current oil contracts between China and Venezuela." Yeah, so
Hmm.
that shows the level. And like I said, it was only a semi-successful one because Delcy Rodriguez was technically part of Maduro's government and still maintains the, I guess you could call it state ideology if you want to. But point being is the United States got some half-baked concessions from the Venezuelans, and now here we are. But to continue on that point, with Iran, it was a complete humiliation. They showed that they were capable of holding up. They showed they were capable of punching back at American assets in the region and at the crown jewel of the empire itself. And that got everyone very nervous. That's what led to this on again, off again, I guess, indefinite ceasefire, except in Lebanon that's getting terror bombed to this day. But with all that, allegedly they discussed Ukraine and Iran and trade issues. Like I said, the kind of issues that were on the agenda versus the amount of time they actually met with each other, uh, the two did not align. Which is why I agree with those who are saying that this was particularly a meeting for the business interests to rub elbows with each other and to uh, really keep the, I guess you could say, globalized economy on life support. Because while I think both nations will have normal trade relations until they don't, much like the Soviet Union Germany example I brought up from 1941. Much the same, I think, applies to America and China. It'll be business as usual until it's not. And that they're going to go over there, they're going to consort with each other, they're going to cut what deals they can on their terms, and then hopefully delay economic crisis in the U.S. think that was also part of letting all these business interests meet with each other. What I did think was funny is the CEO of Nvidia was just prowling the
Yes.
streets of Beijing, eating from random food carts. It was amazing. It was just like every time they flashed him, he was stuffing his face with something. And this is supposed to be one of the largest corporations in the world, one of the most influential men in the world, just like shoving like ramen noodles in his face, like.
And didn't he go there like just before Trump arrived?
I think so. Yeah, I think he was.
Like the day before? He wasn't supposed to go?
Yeah, then he just shows up and just starts. He came out of everyone. He came out of this looking best. I'll just put it that way.
You know, I will say some of the very rich CEOs that went with Trump, and they outnumbered even the politicians that went with him.
Yeah,
So
because
this is a very serious trip.
yeah,
But if
Tim
some of
Cook,
those
Elon
guys,
Musk,
maybe
like
half of them, what's that?
I was just listing some of the people who did go with him: Tim Cook, Elon Musk, like the usual heavy hitters that one would think of.
How many do you figure of those that went with him? If they were Chinese citizens, they would either be executed or thrown in jail. Like quite a large number.
Oh yeah, I would imagine that China is one of those countries that certainly does have its oligarchs, but the oligarchs are beholden to the state and not the other way around. And that has
Yeah.
that has its challenges, but it also has its benefits. And
Yep.
I would say Russia falls in, I guess, what you call a halfway house between that. They're
Yeah.
getting better on the issue, I think, over the years, but some may disagree. I'm open to that. But point being is,
If
uh,
they weren't as good at it, they would this war would have been over, and they would have
exactly.
been and they would have been defeated.
Exactly. Whereas in America, it's just they run the show that there is no recourse against any of these people, even in a power politics sense.
Yeah.
But no, it's interesting that you do bring that up. But I think probably the most significant part that came out of this trip was Trump's comments on Taiwan.
Yeah, go on.
Now, this is nothing new from what I understand. I remember seeing a report back in, I believe it was March of 2021. It was one of these immediately post Trump White House exposes about how terrible he allegedly was, talking about how we can't defend Taiwan. It's 5 feet from China. What are we supposed to do with it? And like that was supposed to make him look bad in the wake of the new Biden administration. Like I said, this is like March 2021. And then going forward with that to current day, Trump more or less affirmed that America is beholden to the one China policy. We do recognize the People's Republic of China as the only Chinese state in existence, as we have since Nixon, number one. Number two, he talks about how infeasible it is to defend Taiwan and that it's simply not going to be on the table. And I think that even, I didn't see any confirmation with this, but the rumor mill was suggesting that arms deals are going to be stifled by this. And I would not be surprised if that's the case. I know that the arms industry loves to make a quick buck. However, with both the Iran war looming again and also the funnel of weapons to Europe and then later to Ukraine, those also remain. So Taiwan might fall on the back burner. However, what I do think is interesting about all of this is that Trump was supposed to be the China hawk, going all the way back to 2015, 2016. And a policy at one time I may have agreed with. In fact, I think there might actually be some comments in the earlier episodes of the War Report where I even endorsed some of the hawkishness towards China. I have to say, over the years, my opinions have certainly changed with that. But it is strange because it seems like ever since the start of his second term, while there have been murmurs of tariffs and another trade war, whatever it might be, he's been quite cordial with the Chinese while upping his aggression against, obviously, Iran. I think everyone would have expected that. But also, despite friendly rhetoric on the surface, a very hostile policy towards Russia. And you could say, oh, well, look, Trump abandoned Ukraine, whatever. No, he simply found a way to extort more money from the Europeans to continue the Ukraine war with American
Yes.
weapons and intelligence. He just launders it through Europe and makes a buck on the side. It's really that simple. People who think that we've somehow abandoned Ukraine are not looking at the bigger picture here. And of course, a lot
Right.
of those
And the reason that the Europeans are so adamant about we're no NATO, NATO troops or European troops in Ukraine unless there's an American backstop is because, rightfully so, they're saying we have to shoulder this entire burden. Like, you make the stuff, we buy it, and then we give it for free to Ukraine. Ukraine will never pay it back
no. Will there even be a
because
Ukraine to pay
Ukraine
it
can't
back?
pay it back. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I don't know what to make of it. I mean, I do in a sense, but in terms of anything that actually makes sense, any real interest, anything that might actually improve the situation, I really don't know what to make of it. It's just feeding this black hole in the case of Ukraine, that is never going to get paid back, is going to continue to try to bleed the Russians dry, even though they have a lot more wherewithal than I think the Ukrainians certainly do, and that just the West as a whole does at this point. But to look at Trump's overall strategy once again, it's amazing how, I guess, soft you could say he's been on China, which I'm not complaining because I think that stable relations between the great powers is a good thing in the long run. But he spends years talking about China this, China that, China Joe. Mark Carney is a Chinese asset and he's going to sell out. We need to take Greenland so the Chinese don't get it. And then he goes over there and it's puts on, in my opinion, what is a pathetic display. Because I think, yes, there's a certainly room where you need to be cordial in international relations. You do need the smiles and the photo ops. But he goes over there, makes concessions that he didn't have to make. Look, if he didn't want to defend Taiwan, he didn't have to come out and say it. And he could have just let the issue be quiet. There is a subtle art of backdoor diplomacy that's been lost over the past 50 years. And I think the last person to really succeed at that, this might be my personal bias, is Nixon, where things could be communicated while being unsaid. And I think Taiwan is one of those, because I don't think that really anyone should die for Taiwan, whether it's Americans or Japanese or Koreans or whoever else. But to go over there and to say that while also simultaneously talking up American power and talking about how we need to do X, Y, and Z and that we need to come down on Iran, it just creates a complete sense of incoherence. Are we a proactive domineering power that's going to assert our interests, our quote unquote interests at any cost, or are we going to be take on a more quote unquote humble foreign policy and be a more restrained traditional great power? But what Trump does is he goes out there, he flies off the handle, he makes all these rhetorical statements, goes to China and acts in, I don't want to say a pathetic manner, but an almost pathetic manner. And
Almost pathetic. Did you see him at the dinner? He's sitting down for whatever reason. Xi Jinping is not at his table, and the paperwork that was at his place on the table, Trump literally picks it up and starts to look inside. I'm going like, do you have any idea how many cameras there are? We're all watching you do this. Like, can you imagine the field day that the Chinese press is having right now? I mean, they are on cloud nine. They're like getting stuff done without a war.
what I did also like is when the delegations were meeting, just the slight hesitation shaking Steve Miller's hand.
Yeah.
That was another good one. It's like, oh, you're the one I've heard about.
We're gonna see another article about how China is becoming more anti-Semitic. There's several that have been written over the recent years.
Oh yeah, I remember when the Epstein files were coming out. It was one of those things where like it's just
it's very concerning.
Yeah,
it's very concerning.
It's a mode of operation in China to assume, the Jewish lobby at this point.
Yeah. I mean, some of their professors openly say it. Like if you watch that YouTube channel, Awakening Richard, it's the most.
Yes.
It's just the worst name for a YouTube, but whatever. He will read Chinese professors that are actually very popular, an actual professors, not high school teachers, that are called professors. I couldn't resist. That like openly say that America is run by Jews.
That cannot be tolerated. That's anti-Semitic.
It's terrible.
That's atrocious. I can't believe they would say that. We should break a relation with China immediately. Full support for Taiwan. Anyone who would even suggest such a thing is participating in dangerous. I can't keep doing this. I'm sorry, I can't keep doing this.
But you know what? I am biting at the bit a little bit here.
Please
because,
do.
I don't know if I think we mentioned it off air that Professor Zhang had a show the day or the evening before Trump landed in China in Beijing. And he said, a lot of people laugh. I'm paraphrasing now, obviously. And this is a little reductionist. I have to condense for the sake of the duration of the show. But he said, a lot of people underestimate Trump, think he's stupid, but he's going to go there and he's going to try to find a way to prop up the dollar. And what he's going to do is he's going to ask the Chinese authorities to change their laws that would allow a greater number of American government bond securities to be bought by the Chinese public. Right now, I found this weird because the news that day and maybe the evening before from Japan was that they did another huge dump of U.S. treasuries. Okay, so keep that in mind as I continue to condense what Professor Zhang said in one of his videos this past week. He said, but will China get in return? And he said Trump will basically indicate that China can have Taiwan. But do you know two countries that will not accept this? Japan and South Korea. Now, I'm thinking at this point, Okay, so what are they going to do? Like what? Okay, so they're going to go to Taiwan to defend Taiwan. Like, what if it happens peacefully? Also, again, why would Japan make the second record dumping of US treasuries? Like in per capita, it was bigger than what China did last year during the spring of the uh, tariff wars. So I don't, some of it is just not making sense. Um, I I would believe him, however, that Trump probably made that proposition. I wouldn't doubt it. But considering all the CEOs he brought, I think there were other propositions.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, but do go on. Sorry to
No,
interrupt you.
no, I'm glad you brought that up because I do think it's an interesting angle because the idea of South Korea and Japan being called in to defend Taiwan after the Americans cut it loose does play almost into the Alex Karp manifesto that we read a few weeks back.
Yep.
But I also just don't see how it's logistically possible, especially with those two being the spearheads of the American empire in East Asia. And that if the Americans are going to roll back commitments to the Taiwanese, the South Koreans and the Japanese are probably likely to follow as well. And that if there's truly going to be an imperial rollback, that is going to be a rollback in earnest because they're not just going to sacrifice one part of that to appease the Chinese. But with all that being said, however, I could see a scenario with that, and I'm not sure how. I'm not necessarily endorsing what Jiang says, but I could see a scenario where, much like in Europe, we leave and burn the region down in the process, and that we
Hmm.
give
Hmm.
license to the Japanese and the South Koreans to launch the next war, as it were, and that there'll be some trans-Pacific support for that, much like there'll be some transatlantic support for the upcoming European-Russian war. But ultimately, it's the strategy of burning down the rest of the world while you treat and not taking into account any of the
Yes. Yes.
consequences that might follow from that that might make Fortress North America an uncomfortable place to live.
Yes. I do agree with that. America as a new arc, right? That dream, that myth comes back.
Yes. And
I always said at the beginning of this show, when I started becoming a regular, maybe not that soon, but a few years after, I said that America does look at itself as I use Baudrillard, but to um, kind of flesh out a a dimension to the idea that America is. And of course, he didn't say this. I'm saying I'm drawing upon his theories, but um, and using them in a way that he wouldn't have. But um, I always said that America sees itself not as not just the new world, but the other world, and the other world can be sacrificed for the sake of the new world.
oh yeah, and I would say in line with a 20th century America, the one that had gotten over its say foundational religious zeal, that the idea of burning down the old world both in the west and the east is quite appealing to it.
Yeah, it does like that. It does hate them.
And funny enough, I think this is actually another. He's not the only one to say it, but I think it is another Zhang term where America is in a way an anti-civilization, and
Yeah.
but I do agree, like especially post 20th century America, I do think that the bizarre petri dish of various flavors of Protestantism actually did keep the country grounded in the 18th, well, late 18th and throughout the 19th century. But once World War One rolled around, once the uh, American mythology came into itself, it became it was a disaster to say the least. And that I think, let's just look at the atomic bombs. Let's look at the various bombing campaigns throughout World War II and following it. I do think there is something in the psyche of this nation, at least its leadership, and it might trickle down to the population, but the leadership, that's the important part,
Hmm.
that does somewhat relish in burning down the old world and establishing the new. And that it's that revolutionary zeal removed from its context, just purely refined.
Yeah, yeah. The what's left is the disdain and the hate for the old world.
Yes, and what's left and weaponized, and then you combine that with a ruling class of some of the most revolutionary people to ever exist, and it's a recipe for
Yeah,
disaster.
yes.
Uh,
Any time culture is chosen over money, it's an abomination.
yeah, and I mean, like, what I wouldn't give for an old Anglo-Saxon elite. And look, that's me endorsing Perfidious Albion over the alternative. Now, Perfidious look, Perfidious Albion is still a force of destruction that needs to be contained. But the revolutionary classes, I'll call them, of I don't know, certain ethno-religious affiliation, that's just it's unmitigated disaster through and through.
Yeah, but if based on what King Charles said recently, not going to happen.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I memory hold that. I mean,
But I completely agree with you.
yeah, yeah, but that's something I'll mention.
Anything's better than them.
Yeah, but because you brought up King Charles, how fitting is it that you have the king of the English coming to the world's preeminent power, begging them to get involved in another destructive war in continental Europe? What is more fitting?
Maybe we can touch on that a little bit.
No, please
But no,
do.
no. I think uh, we should continue to talk about China and like how Trump looks after this. All I'm saying is we should probably wait till midweek. By Wednesday, I think we'll know what some of the deals were.
Yes, things will become much more evident once we let a
we,
little
we
more
really
time
don't
pass.
know them right now. So far, like all the big questions, Hormuz, Russia, the Russia-Ukraine war, like none of that. There were no concessions, not one,
And
not one,
none of the stuff you
and a
wanted to hear
warning,
about.
and a warning, and a warning that Taiwan is the most important issue to them. However, it made no concessions, which kind of goes in against the grain. Like what's his name? The British, or maybe he's an Aussie. Helmer, who lives in Russia for, I mean, I don't know how many decades, 3, 4, but J- John Helmer like wrote an article of a few weeks back about how China backstabbed Iran. Then China had a change of mind. I mentioned him on the last show because he used very strong words. So now he was on another show where he said. Uh, Trump, sorry, not Trump. China just sold Iran down the drain or the river rather. And I'm thinking like, dude, you are all over the place. Like they didn't even give one concession. Like you're smarter than me with proof. But even I can figure out that there has not been a concession yet. And I mean, we'll just have to see what happens next. We're all waiting to see if this war against Iran resumes.
Yeah,
But go ahead.
I know the speculations were Friday night that it was going to happen. It didn't.
Yeah.
And the speculation that was going to happen tonight, Saturday night that we're recording, and lo and behold, it didn't. Once again, I think they would love nothing more than to resume this, but the practical constraints do not allow it. Because they saw what happened for the first 37 days that this went on, and they know that the Iranians are far from down for the count, and that they will continue to wage an attritional war against the global energy market if this does continue. And to the point where the Saudis, they're looking to defect. Um, Maybe that's a strong word for it, But once again, they're trying to cut their backdoor deals with the Iranians. They at a certain point denied the Americans access to use their territory for further attacks on Iran. The Emiratis, I guess, are still gung ho about this, which of course they are. And but point being is none of the factors on the ground line up for this to happen. They're chomping at the bit for it to happen. It is so dire that even the Israelis are not taking it into their own hands. Because you know
Hmm.
why? Because their resources are constrained. Because their means to act are constrained.
Yeah.
So they're taking out on Lebanon. And it just comes down to that.
Yeah, we should mention the bombing in Lebanon is still going on. The bombing in Gaza is still going on. Yes, yes, yes. Maybe they took out some less than significant or only significant if you follow this war extremely closely and are deeply involved in that sort of minutia. But this leader there, that leader there, of course, 5, 10, 15 people are sacrificed who have often nothing to do with this guy. And the last one that they killed in Lebanon, they said they're sure they got him, which means they're not sure they got him. Um, because they would have said unequivocally that they got him. But the only thing I wanted to say about what's going on in Britain, of course, um, Starmer's cabinet is revolting against him. They want him gone. And, I suppose there's several factions that want him gone. Everybody understands he's deeply unpopular. Of course, I know people in my own life who are right wing who are going to celebrate this. It's like you're being stupid. Like I don't like him any more than you do. But there's a reason why Starmer is going overboard with trying to stop anti-Semitism in Britain, but not joining the war against Iran, right? Because that's the one ally that is supposed to be always by America's side,
The special
but never,
relationship.
especially, but never gets the credit the way Israel does. So, or not to the same extent. Now, obviously, there's more than one faction that wants Starmer out. His popularity hasn't increased since his electoral victory in August 2024. It's only decreased or it's plateaued. It's in the very low double digits, like a lot of European leaders, even like Trump, if we're being honest. But there is going to be, the Zio faction that wants a leader to do more than just talk about anti-Semitism in England. And of course, they're going to introduce, according to King Charles, um, some kind of digital ID. They are going to try to install a new labor leader that is willing to do more against Iran. It doesn't matter whether it's the left that wants him because they think they need him to go against the Tories or Nigel Farage. It doesn't matter, like, but it will be someone who is more pro-war against Iran.
I agree with everything you said, but I'll tell you who they really need at a time like this.
Do tell.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, the poor guy, man. Like,
you know,
I I made a funny tweet that I regretted a year later about him when I was on Twitter. There's a picture of him getting out of this very expensive car with this like big long white fur coat. It literally looks. It almost. I don't know if you remember Seinfeld, the episode where Kramer gets this colorful coat from Joseph in the Technicolor Dream, and he finds this hat that goes with it. It looks like a pimp outfit, and all these people presume he's a pimp, right? So he's wearing this big, long, white, furry coat, and then there was a picture of him, in a tracksuit, an ill-fitting tracksuit, and how it started, how it ended, right? But I shouldn't have done it because he was the only decent guy in British politics.
Yeah, I remember back when we were doing the show, I think 2018, 2019, where I don't know, I surprised myself and I didn't support him, but I actually remember saying he's the less bad option.
Yeah, definitely the least bad
Yeah,
option.
like I can't believe it. Like it's
When you have British people of Jewish descent that say he has to go, you better be worried.
oh yeah. But he was in. Remember when they spent like a week freaking out because he said Epstein with a German accent?
Yeah.
oh,
It's a dog whistle.
oh no, yeah, but that was yeah. That's what they need to bring back. I know it's not going to happen, but no, I agree with everything you said about Starmer, where he is. I don't want to call him an unwitting hero because he's not, but he's a very convenient placeholder from somebody who's a lot more rabid.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought? And I know that the thought now from a lot of people is that, just to round out with this miscellaneous news here, is that Farage is being groomed for the role where he's going to be the quote
Yep.
unquote based guy. He's going to be the I guess you could call it gladio nationalist, who's going to be the we're gonna bring Britain back and we're gonna take care of all this, all while peddling this bland civic nationalism and love for Israel, etc., etc. And Tommy Robinson, of course, where he's gonna
Yeah, yeah.
wish the Hindus happy Diwali and then talk to you about the importance of English civilization at
Did
without
you see
missing a
some of the
beat.
footage from the two counter protests today in London?
I try not to, but I did.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. They were handing out all these crosses. I mean, of course, for people who don't know this show, Constantine and I are both Orthodox Christians. We attend church very regularly. So, um, but I know to what ends they're going to use that cross.
Oh yeah,
And I would say about 25% of the flags next to the cross of St. George and the Union Jack were Israeli flags, and I don't like those numbers.
neither do I. That's yeah, and they will. I'll go on this rant again. I've said it many times. I'll say it again. They'll weaponize your faith. They'll weaponize your culture. They'll weaponize your ethnic interests, all in the interest of this one very narrow project. And I'm not just talking about Israel. They'll do this for Russia as well. They'll do this to get you to die in the fields of Ukraine. China, I guess my analysis on that has been thrown into a complete tailspin given Trump's recent rhetoric because uh, look, I think hostilities between China and the United States are very high, but it seems like neither side's quite willing to pull the trigger, and the Americans are actually looking for some convenient outs for it. But point being is, they will weaponize all these things. Is my ultimate point, in order to get you, who they consider a moron, who they consider a fool, who they consider a dupe, to fight and die in their interests, while they, I guess, appease you with a certain aesthetic. They don't deliver
Yeah.
any of the substance; they deliver all the style. That's why they let Trump back in. That's why they're probably going to let Farage in. That's why you have all these uh, fake right parties across the European continent, these gladio nationalists, as I like to call them, who are just that, to funnel any real energy for change or political opposition. I'm not somebody who has much faith in, say, the
Yeah, and they
grassroots
have to be
empire.
directed to Ukraine or Israel or both.
Yes, preferably both.
Yeah.
So long as you come out of it parroting State Department talking points, you can dress it up in whatever style you want. They'll even let you be a little anti-Semitic so long as you dress it up in State Department talking points.
If you want to read Robert Kagan's article from 2006, go ahead. You'll love it.
Yeah, yeah. Hail Odin for Israel. That's the
Yeah.
that's what it's always been about, and that's what they'll continue to push. And a lot of people who should know better will fall for it, and I trust that none of the listening audience of this show will be ones to fall for it because I don't want to talk ourselves up too much, but I think we've cultivated a certain audience.
Hmm.
But that's all I had for this week. I don't know if you have any last minute things.
The only last minute thing I'll say is when Trump was asked about Taiwan, oh, sorry, Rubio, he said, well, we'll help them. We'll help them. But he didn't say how they'll help them. What I mean to say by this is America is never going to stop with the strategic ambiguity that began with Nixon. That will never end. Like it will never end until China actually takes back Taiwan.
Which, given the pace of things, I said it as arguably a throwaway line a few years back, but I'm starting to lean more towards this position. The idea of a bloodless reunification is not out of the question, especially I think after the Iran War.
Yeah, yeah. It really has changed a lot.
Yeah, and I always thought it was a possibility and a distant sense, but considering the dynamics of the Iran War, the energy markets in East Asia, and I think a lot of it will come down to somebody pointed this out in the comments. I can't remember who it was, but you'll know who you are if you're listening. About the Alaska gas fields and the American exploitation of those becoming dominant in the East Asian markets. And I think that, yes, that is true, but I think it'll be the efficacy of the ability of the Americans to offload Alaskan gas onto East Asia that will determine really the American position there. I think that's the big question mark hanging above everyone's head right now when it comes to some of these more ambiguous statements about Taiwan or Japan or Korea or whatever else it might be.
Hmm.
But that's one of the stories that we'll just have to follow with that. But yeah, the idea of the peaceful reunification has, I would say, taken on a whole new life, and it's one of those stories that we'll just have to keep our eye on. But that's really all I had for this week.
Yeah, and we'll try to have Geo on because I think it's time now that some of the seething has died down to talk about some of Dugan's latest statements.
Yes, and we need to read the Soros article. That's a non-negotiable one because
Yeah, yeah,
I've
yeah.
been saying that for years. We're finally going to do it.
Okay,
But yeah,
sounds good.
yeah. But
Uh,
I am eager to litigate. I don't know, the puppet master of the Kremlin. What is he called? Dugin's brain. Not Dugin's brain. Putin's brain. But
Putin, right? How
yeah.
is he wrong?
But with all that being said, keep your eye out for that.
Yep.
We'll try to have that as soon as possible. And see you guys next time. And goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.